Well, I'm joined now by Iman Ayton, who's organised her own Black Lives Matter protests, including the likes of actor John Boyega and Madonna, and royal historian and author Sir Anthony Seldon. So welcome to both of you. This is a really incendiary debate now. Never used to be. It used to be just everyone used to agree Winston Churchill was a national hero who saved us from the Nazis, and that was it. But now he's not. And I'll start, Iman, by saying this. I understand why young people look back at some of the things that Churchill was recorded as saying, some of the views that he held, and I understand why it may colour the judgment about him, literally, actually. But I also believe you should take all great figures in totality.
I agree.
Whether it's Gandhi, Mandela, Churchill, whoever it may be. And the welter of positives for Winston Churchill, to me, outweigh attitudes and occasional comments which were by far the norm of that era and wouldn't be tolerated today. And what's your reaction to that?
I totally agree with you. So I don't actually harp on the covert racism or the kind of, the comments like black people are savages and Indians are a beastly race. I don't actually hold on to that because you're right, it was during those times, not that it's acceptable. We can safely say it wasn't. What I hold on to, for example, is yes, he was a hero. I think I was given the same kind of narrative that most people were, that this is a British hero. Admittedly, it was only when I saw Churchill was a racist, that graffiti that was written on his statue during Black Lives Matter, that prompted me, as a random person, to say, you know what, I'm going to go home and research Winston Churchill. And in doing that, I found the two things that resonated with me personally. The first was the 4 million Indians that died due to the Bengal famine, which was a direct result of Winston Churchill's decision-making. The second would have to be, hold on.
No, okay.
Fair enough.
But on that, I'll come back to you, because that is simply not true.
Okay, you can tell me
the mythology that's built up around what happened, and I'll let the great historian fill in the blanks here. But there's a lot of mythology that's been fermenting about Churchill's culpability over the Bengal famine. But for anything else, he didn't cause the famine. The famine was caused by a cyclone. It was then massively exacerbated by a failure to get resource and food into the area because of the war and because of Japan's stranglehold on the area, and so on and so on. Churchill did direct other countries, including America and Australia, to try and send grain to Bengal. But he also prioritised, when it really came to it, British troops who were going to die of hunger as well. And as a British Prime Minister in a war, I'm not sure you can necessarily blame him. Now,
which I've heard, and I
Oh, wait, so I see exactly what he's saying. I don't know a lot about Churchill. I know enough. I know he was the Prime Minister of the UK. I think what was it, 1940? To 1945, that was during World War II. So there's a lot of stuff that was going on at that time. You guys already know how many soldiers lost their life during World War I and World War II. And for what she was saying is that somebody wrote that Churchill was a racist on the statue, and she said that was during the Black Lives Matter protests. So a lot of stuff did happen during those protests, and a lot of bad stuff. And for some reason, just like how she's building up his past, Churchill past, and things that he did, why don't you bring up the things that all these Black Lives Matter protesters did during the riots? Are we going to sit here and pick and choose who we're going to point the finger at and who are we going to point out their faults? It should be the same. What you guys think about that in the comments?
So my point is that it's very easy to say that Churchill caused the famine and the death of 4 million people. But actually, when you get into the weeds about what happened there, that's simply not accurate historically.
Well, I said it was due to his decision-making. And secondly, that's not the only thing that resonated with me. The second thing that resonated with me, Piers, was the fact that he built Kenyan concentration camps. So please school me and tell me I am wrong. He built Kenyan concentration camps 7 years after World War II, 7 years after defeating fascism, 7 years after getting rid of concentration camps for Jews. He decided after 7 years of growth and learning and all of this peace and all of this amazingness that Britain has achieved, we're now going to build concentration camps, and not for Jews. This time it's going to be for Kenyans. And we're now going to start making pillars, these kind of different instruments that literally crush and rip the testicles off of Kenyan men. And we're going to do that 7 years after defeating Nazism. So yes, I've got a different perspective.
We've heard the...
I see what she's saying. Well, why do we always, every one of these BLM activists, you guys let me know if I'm wrong in the comments, all they always do is point out the wrong that a white person did. Maybe it's just me. That's all I see. We all know Kenya, that's in Africa, but that's all I see that they do. That's all they do. They don't point out the wrong what the white man does, but not point out the wrong what the black man does. When I'm referring to the black man, it goes back to Africa selling slaves. Do anybody ever point the finger? Any BLM activist that could do your research, be pretty sure you got the resources to do the research. We know you got the resources. So once you take all your resources together and find out how all of this came about, Africans selling slaves. Like anybody gonna do a research on that and let us know? Or we just gonna sit there and keep pointing what the white man was doing during those times. That's all I see. All I see is finger pointing at the white. That's all I see. But there's nobody standing there and looking at himself in the mirror. I don't see any of that happening.
And it's a view clearly shared by a lot of young people. I mean, staggering, these new statistics now of people who really dislike Churchill and have no respect for him.
Well, I think it's partly the fact he was built up to be such a big figure. But for me, everything that has been identified that Iman is talking about is important and needs to be weighed into the equation.
Thank you, Anthony. That's all I want. That's all I want.
Because we are all mixtures of good and bad.
I agree.
Every leader.
Yes.
And I think for young people to have the evidence and weigh it up, I'm just going to mention 3 good things he did. And by the way, I agree the treatment of the Kikuyu tribe in Kenya during that period of suppressing Mau Mau was utterly deplorable.
7 years after World War II in
from 1952 onwards. But this is what he did. He did on the welfare state. He was a core person building the welfare state before the First World War, and as Prime Minister in the Second World War, he oversaw the Beveridge Report and encouraged it, which has been enormously the benefit. Secondly, he was the first politician to spot the end of the Cold War in 1953. He made an extraordinary speech after the death of Stalin saying we can't carry on as we were. And thirdly, there was what he did in the Second World War, where Hitler, 6 million Jews, 50 million dead in that war, he did stand up when Britain was alone. So to give young people the evidence on both sides and let them come to their own judgment, and to recognise that every leader, us, me, you, Piers, everyone, is a mixture of good and bad.
But not monstrous, and that's my issue. Not everyone is a mixture of monstrous and hero.
Well, you
so
say
good
that.
and bad is one thing, but being monstrous,
deciding
to actually crush and rip
take one of my
black men,
but take one of my heroes like Nelson Mandela. He was on the no-fly list for this country throughout most of the 70s. Right? He was a man that many viewed as a terrorist. And then he came out and he turned out to be one of the all-time great peacemakers.
Yes.
Now, again, do you take his life in totality, Mandela, or do you say that actually anyone involved in any form of activity which could be classed as terrorism is a monster, and therefore there is no chance for a public figure to redeem?
Did Nelson Mandela sanction making pliers that crushed and ripped the off of black men? Did Nelson Mandela do that, Piers?
What he did sanction was he sanctioned activity which by today's standards would be construed as terrorism.
But so we can safely say that, yes, everyone is good bad. I'm not negating that point. The issue is,
my point is that you can take almost any historical figure and you can paint a picture, as Anthony said, of negative and positive. To me, what Churchill achieved in World War II overrides everything else.
But why, though? So why does that supersede the fact that he caused tens of thousands of black deaths, and potentially, again, it's arguable, but potentially his decision-making led to the deaths of millions of Indians? So what you're saying...
But that's not true.
But what we can say categorically is what I said about the Kenyan concentration camps. So if you think that the Kenyan concentration camps wasn't monstrous, then what you're doing is you're negating the thoughts and feelings and experiences of everyone else.
I don't actually negate anything that Churchill did on the negative side. I think a lot of the things he said were certainly racially tinged at best.
But what about the things that he did? What about the pliers that I've just told you?
We're not defending that at all.
He's not defending that. You're just saying everybody has good and bad to them. Everybody. There's no perfect being on this planet Earth. There's none. Zero. So what Piers is saying, he's not agreeing with what he did, but what he's saying, people trying to outlook the amount of good that he did by taking the little bad things that he did and making it overshadow the good things that he did, referring back to World War II and other stuff. But the way she's going on off of how many black people, this is the problem that I have with this BLM activist. If you want to point fingers, you have to be willing to point a finger back at yourself. Instead of focusing on the past, nobody's focusing on the future. Nobody's focusing the mistakes that happened in the past and try to correct them in the present time. I haven't seen one person, no BLM activist, try to change history. They sit back and watch us, many of us of the same color, take each other's life for less. But you want to point finger at this white man. We take each other's life for less. We take each other's life, especially here in the U.S., for who block, who territory. Meanwhile, you don't own that territory. You don't own that block. But you will take another black man's life, all because in your head and your delusion that is your block and he can't come into your territory. You guys remember there was a whole thing going on in the clubs when people when they got the shoe stepped on? Oh, it's a fight in the club. Somebody gonna lose their life over somebody making a mistake and stepping on your shoes. Think about that. I saw this one young man lost his life for $5. $5. Let that make sense. $5. I saw this another young man. I could go on and on. That followed this lady, an Asian lady, for miles. Finally encountered her, tried to rob her. Things went left. She got paralyzed. Now he was 18 years old. Him and his girlfriend. He was 18 or 19. His girlfriend. They're around the same age. Both of them are around the same age. No, he got found guilty. 30 years in prison. You just crippled that woman for a couple $100. She has to learn how to walk again. She has kids, little kids. Are we going to talk about all this? Are we going to talk about the young man, 18 years old, that tried to rob a grandma? She was like almost 70 years old, black woman, for $18. $18. Terrorizing the community. But we only gonna focus. We gotta focus on the present, man. Enough with the past. We know what happened. History. We could go look it up. We could go research. We could do all of that. Why can't we try to change what's going on now? That's the problem I have with this BLM activists. All they do is focus on the past and bring back up all the trauma that happened, everything that was hurtful. They all bring that up, but we don't talk about what's going on now in these communities.
So and that's the point. We need to balance the argument. I agree with Anthony.
Yeah, but my point is,
argument
where on right, but where I agree, but where on your balanced argument does the pendulum swing to saving the world from the Nazis?
Oh, I agree. No, see, this is the thing. I'm not the extremist. I don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Maybe you're used to those types of guests here.
But that's all you're bringing up.
I believe in balance. So I actually agree with you. I think he did incredible things. Okay. But I think it's also important to acknowledge that he also did really monstrous things.
Oh, my God. But
both arguments and
give the man his credit.
As indeed you have.
Okay, so the sheer fact that we're having this discussion now, that we are here able to talk, is because he led this country to stand up against a fascist dictator who, like many of the leaders in the world today, many want to, China, Russia, North Korea, and more, want to squeeze free debate, the kind of discussion we have at the moment. We can go back, have our separate lives. We're not going to be put in. We
wouldn't be having it under Nazi Germany.
I agree with you. I'm not disputing your point.
So give them the facts. And I think that perhaps it was inevitable. There was so much adulation of Churchill. There's now a steep, I mean, that's a really extraordinary figure. 80% of young people have a negative picture. I think that maybe in 5 years' time it will rebalance. I think myself will disagree, Imam, on this, that I think that it will be overwhelmingly positive about Churchill while not ignoring the downside. And I think if people can learn about humanity then, that people's flaws, including what he did, or what he sanctioned as Prime Minister in the 1950s in Kenya, weigh all that, then that's real education. That's what history is about.
I mean, there are proper arguments to be
Yes.
made about the carpet bombing of Dresden in World War II, which
Yeah.
many people think was completely unacceptable. Churchill would argue, if he was here, he's not, but if he was, he would argue it was a necessary evil to facilitate the hastening of the ending of the war. Now, a lot of people don't agree with that historically. But if you're a wartime leader, you've got to make horrendous decisions.
I totally agree with you. And I bring it back to just having an inclusive mindset. And I think that's the issue here, that many people seem to not, or let me just put it this way. I don't think people are disputing the fact that he's a hero. I think that many people are disputing the fact that he is also a monster. And that is where the problem lies, Piers. I'm not saying he's not a hero. Everything that you've just said, I agree. I think it's awesome. But I also have to take into account that the Indian population that died, potentially because of his decision-making, probably wouldn't have called him a hero. I have to take into account that the men that were having their ripped from their bodies probably wouldn't call Winston Churchill a hero either. So again, it comes down to an inclusive mentality. When you take into account everyone's feelings, it becomes a lot harder to then definitively say someone is a hero or a villain.
Okay.
What you usually do is say they are both. You take into account they are racist, you take into account that they're a hero, and you take into account that they
Anthony,
are a
final point on
monster.
Churchill before I turn to you.
I think he sanctioned some monstrous things.
He did indeed.
Personally, I don't think he was a monster. I think he had a deeply
Sanctioning monstrous things doesn't make you a monster. Is that right, Anthony? Let's just make sure you're clear. If you do monstrous things, you're not a monster. Is that correct?
I think that...
Is that correct?
Well, let me ask you a difficult question. Do
All
you think the unleashing of 2 nuclear weapons in World War II at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, was that justified or was that monstrous?
I think those types of things are monstrous.
Okay.
Anything that kills anyone else is a monstrous
Okay,
act.
so you're calling the...
Oh, I intend that. What? Did she just say what I think she just said is a monstrous act when you're what? So, let's talk about these gang violence. Innocent kids die. Innocent people, innocent bystanders. Thousands a year. When was the last time Churchill was in power? When did he die? When did all this pretty much fizzle out? We're talking about, that was before I was born. Ever since then, let's calculate the past 10 years, how many black lives have been lost due to gang violence. Go research that up.
Calling the American president that did that a monster.
Anyone that kills anyone else, it's a monstrous act, whether you want to see it like that or
But that
not.
brought to an end a war that would have killed many, many, many more people.
But it still doesn't negate the fact that it was monstrous to the people that died. And that's what I'm trying to say,
Sure.
that you're now
But
putting
what about-
your feelings and white people's feelings and Jewish
What about
feelings
white
and British
people?
feelings above everyone else that had a negative
No,
interaction
it's not about
with this
white people. You
man.
shouldn't. See, I think you let yourself down when you
No,
say
it is.
that.
White people, British
Yes.
people, Jewish people, the people that I typically, this is where I'm coming from, the people that I typically find defend Winston Churchill. There have been many black, let's be honest with ourselves here, but I typically find it's majority white because we have this real kind of admiration for the man. And so a lot of people...
Well, quite
really
rightly,
do-
because he saved us from
But
Nazi
we
Germany.
have to take in consideration that he
I don't
was
think
a
anybody
monster
thinks that
and
Winston
racist.
Churchill... Nobody thinks he was an angel at all.
Nobody
But he
said
took a lot of
that.
very difficult decisions.
But they're
where
not
these
negating,
decisions...
but people are negating the fact that he is a monster. That is the issue. Be balanced.
All right,
Piers,
you made your
balance.
point. You made your point. Anthony, I want to just
Yeah.
talk to you quickly about your book. The Path of Peace, Walking the Western Front Way. Couldn't be more timely, obviously. Remembrance Sunday this weekend. When you wrote this book, have we learned the lessons that led to the catastrophe of the First World War, do you think?
So, no, categorically not. I mean, as I was walking that, the Third World War was in Ukraine, perhaps about to unfold. It was the vision of a young soldier, Piers, who uniquely, it would seem, had a vision on building a path to peace, which I think is fundamental, where we can have people, his vision was of all nations or all faiths or backgrounds walking side by side together to try to learn from the dead from both sides. So I walked back last summer 1,000 kilometers, 1 million paces through soil where 10 million had bled to death or had their lives totally wrecked in the effort of trying to build a path to peace. He was an extraordinary, visionary young man. And so, no, but it is by building understanding, building bridges with each other. I think maybe not rushing myself to condemn other people, to understand why they did things, that we have the best hope for humanity. And that's exactly why I wrote the book. And the Western Front Way now is the world's biggest commemoration project. Everyone can walk it or cycle it. It's going to become like the Northern Camino. I think it was the best idea to come out of the First World War, Piers, even though it categorically hasn't ended the Second World War, didn't stop the Second World War. What other hope is there unless we just walk together, respect our difference, and indeed love each other for our differences?
Which is an inclusive mentality, by the way, just so you know.
Well, I think
on
we've
that
respected each other's differences.
Thank you.
I wouldn't go as far as say we love each other yet, but the night is young. The night is young. Sir Anthony Selden, great to see you. Iman Aiton, thank you very much for coming in. I appreciate it.
Like Pierre said, nobody said Churchill was perfect. We never said that. But you can't sit there and just only try to point out the bad that somebody did. You gotta also point out the good that they did. She keeps talking about the Kenya camps, but nobody talks about the different tribes that were going into other African homes, raiding it and taking the kids. That's also facts. That's also history. They don't talk about that. All they talk about, can I guess, is money to be made from it, is the black and the white man. That's all you hear. You don't hear them calling out the other tribes that were conquering other tribes and taking the kids from their home at a very young age. Did they talk about that? Yes, we know what happened then. We know history. We can't go back and change. We can't rewind time. We don't have a time machine unless somebody got one that we don't know about. Otherwise, we can't change it. And you look into the future now. How many black men die, and kids and women, a year due to gang violence? Do many lives, drugs, crack, cocaine, lives that they have ruined a year? That's still continue to happen. It's getting worse. While they focusing on the past, the present and the future is looking very dim. That's why I said we need to learn from the past and try to change the future. But they're stuck on the past, only talking about the past, what the white man did in the past, and then talking about the now. Nobody's focusing on the then, and I think that's the huge problem. And that's a huge problem with the youths. Even though we see the youth doing a lot of really bad things out there, the world is taking a shift for the worse. People are not correcting the youths. The youths are pretty much lying because people are less feeding them a bunch of BS information. They're not shaping them to be the next generation, the future. They're not doing that, man. And it's just sad to see that people will sit there and you only point at the white man. How many times have we heard this? It's old now. When are you going to talk about what's going on right now? When are you going to talk about the current state right now? We can talk about what's going on right now, currently in Africa. Anybody going to talk about that? What about the church? I think it was in Nigeria. The church was some of the black terrorist groups went in there, and how many people died? Almost 60 people lost their lives for nothing. Did BLM talk about that? Did anybody talk about that? I think that happened last year. Did they pick and choose what part of history that they want to talk about and that they want to focus on? And I think that's wrong, and that's why things will never get better. It never will. Because there's people that have the position and power and the following that they could lead by example. Like lead with some dignity and some pride. That lead that you want change. But it has to be a fair change that you want. You can't keep pointing at somebody and blaming that person all the time. Eventually, you're gonna have to take some of the blame. Churchill was not perfect. I think he died. What he died? I think it was in 1965. I think he passed away. And we were still going to be talking about that was way before I was even born. I think my mom was like what? I think my mom was like 1 year old. And we talking about that. We ain't talking about what's going on now. We can't change what happened, man. Man, I'd love to hear you guys take about this in the comments. What you guys think about Churchill in the comments? What kind of person do you think it is? Do you think the bad that they say that he did outweighs the good that he did. I'd love to hear you guys think about that in the comments. Listen, man, everybody comes with good and bad with them. Nobody's perfect. But you can't sit there and try to point out. That's what she was trying to do. She didn't want to be, but she had no choice but to admit. She was pretty much pointing all the bad things that he did. You gotta point the good out too, man. Everybody comes with the good and bad with them. You can't sit there and judge them. That's why you gotta give them. You gotta get them their due when it's the good things. And I love to hear you guys think about this in the comments, man. And hey, until then, I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out. You guys have a blessed day.